Welcome, everyone, as we continue our journey through 19th century American history. And I spent some time talking about the political situation with Andrew Jackson and the changes that took place and the problems that took place. And what I want to do now is speak to you about social issues during this period. And when you study history the way I do, there are so many elements to change. There are technological changes, right? There are political changes, there are social changes, and there are cultural changes. And there's only one good thing about getting older, and that is that when you get older, if you live long enough, you can look back on those changes. Um, the world that I live in today is in many ways very different from the world that I was born into. When I was in grade school, if you had said, well, someday you'll be teaching a class over something called the internet and interacting with students in real time this way, that's something that was science fiction. I mean, that's something that you'd see in Star Trek, but here we are. So there are a lot of changes happening in the early to middle 19th century. So let me make sure that you understand what the big ones are, because you're going to have to know them for your final. Obviously, we're speaking about territorial change. We already covered the Louisiana Purchase. I have not covered the Mexican-American War with you yet, but I will in the coming weeks. So we have territorial expansion happening. So let's say, well, let's talk about a 50-year period, which is really not a lot in history. That's a blip. So let's say, 1800 to 1850, right? That's where we've been focusing the past couple of weeks. So in that 50-year period, the United States expanded its border all the way to the Pacific Ocean. California became a state in 1850. That's a pretty big change. We have a relatively high birth rate. We have ongoing immigration. By the time we get to the 1830s and 40s, there will be a lot of immigrants coming to the United States from Ireland. They will be coming here in large part to escape the potato famine. So there are demographic changes. The country is becoming physically larger. I always like to take a moment and acknowledge that as the country expanded, it happened at a price. Certainly the largest price was paid by Native Americans, or indigenous people, if you prefer. But this is happening throughout the 19th century as the country is getting bigger. The population is growing. That's an issue. The technological revolution, the industrial revolution, is underway. During this period, this is where we see the introduction of mechanical power, steamships, trains, the building of canals like the Erie Canal, and later we'll see a rapid expansion of railroad construction. Those are big changes. There will be a change in how people communicate with the introduction of something called the telegraph. So these are changes. I mean, life expectancies back then were obviously less than what we have today because they didn't have modern medical technology and medications like we have now. But I mean, these are changes that people would have experienced within one lifetime. But certainly a lot of people would have seen these changes within their lifetime. So we have territorial expansion, we have the Industrial Revolution, we have population growth, and political change. The whole, age of Jackson uh, was a period of great change. And Jackson was someone who was going to test the limits of presidential power and presidential authority. And he did. And the fact is, this man served 8 years as president, and he imposed his will on the nation. There's no question about it. There are people who loved him for it, and people who hated him for it, and people to this day who still love and hate Andrew Jackson. I think the reasons are pretty clear. But this is also a period of great social change. As the country is changing physically and technologically, it's changing socially. And people begin to discuss what we would call issues. Now, in the past few years, there has been a lot of social change and social upheaval in our own time. We discuss issues and debate issues and sometimes argue about issues in a way that was not common not that long ago. When I certainly was a child, even by the time I got to college, I was a college student myself in the late 80s, early 1990s. And at that time, the idea, for example, of gay marriage was something that, really didn't happen at the time. And being open, people who are open today about issues of sexuality and gender identity. I mean, there were people who were questioning things and people who were open about these things, but it was not a widespread thing throughout the culture, is what I'm saying. We are much more open today in discussing these issues than the past. Issues regarding race have certainly been a part of our history from the beginning. You don't have to be a history professor to understand that at the moment we are dealing with a lot of issues related to race and racism, and there is a debate and in this country about what is the appropriate way to proceed, and some people agree, others disagree. The issue of law enforcement, of course, and the appropriate role of law enforcement in our society. Are the police mostly a positive force for public safety? Are they a negative force? And people are arguing about these things. So, issues regarding climate change and so on. So we have issues right now that we argue about nationally. We debate. Sometimes those debates become heated. I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, know someone with whom, it isn't difficult to get into an argument if you bring up certain topics. But the fact is that if you look at American history, we've had moments of great social change. Let me give you a more modern day example. Several years ago, before gay marriage became legal as a result of a Supreme Court ruling, there was a debate in California. I believe it was called Proposition 8, which would legalize gay marriage in California. I think that was the name of the proposition. I could be wrong. But I remember students coming into my class, and some of them would wear, this is a true story, this really happened. I had two girls come into my class, they sat down next to each other, and one of them had a shirt that said yes on 8, and another had a shirt that said no on 8. And if my memory is correct, the proposition did not pass. And I remember I had a student who was gay, who was very disappointed about this. And he asked me what I thought. And I said, well, sooner or later, I think this is going to happen. And 30 years from now, people are going to look back on it and wonder what all the fuss was about. That's what I told him. And sure enough, a few years later, the change did happen. So why am I telling you this? Well, there was a big debate in this country over that issue, and in some ways there still is, depending on where you are and who you talk to. Well, in the 19th century, they were not debating gay marriage, but they were debating women's suffrage, whether or not women should have the right to vote. Now, I'll speak for myself, and I'll assume that many of you will agree, but when's the last time anyone got into an argument about whether or not women should have the right to vote? I mean, isn't it fair to say that that's a dead issue? I mean, if someone were to say to you, well, women voting, I just don't see it, and it doesn't make much sense to me, you would probably look at this person and think, what's wrong with you, right? So, you look back on this issue and say, well, what was all the fuss about? Well, you have to understand that different periods in history, you're dealing with cultural differences, values are different, expectations are different. And for those of you who are here right now, the idea of women voting, you'll probably say to yourself, well, what's the problem? I mean, why should a person's gender determine whether or not they're eligible to vote or not? So this is a non-issue today in the United States in our current culture. But in the United States in the 19th century, the idea of women voting is radical stuff. So what I'm saying is today's no big deal is yesterday's big deal, is what I'm trying to tell you. Just like, there are issues that in your lifetime may seem like, today's big deal. In the future, people are going to wonder what was all the fuss about. Because cultures change over time. So as the country was changing in the 19th century, social issues are coming up, and they are being talked about and debated and discussed in ways and at a level that they hadn't been before. Top of the list above everything else is the slavery issue. And I will say that the United States as a nation has struggled with the issue of race from its founding, and it's an issue that we're still dealing with. But I will also say that I disagree with the idea that we have not made progress. We have made progress. That doesn't mean that we're finished, and it doesn't mean that we don't have a long way to go, and it doesn't mean that we can't do better. But the issue, it isn't like this generation is not the first generation to talk about these things, is what I'm trying to tell you. People were arguing about this stuff and talking about it in the 19th century, and there were some very, very deeply committed people to the abolitionist cause. They didn't always agree. They had different points of view, but this issue was discussed, and it was a part of our political discourse, and it was a part of, it was top of the list among the social issues that people were aware of and talking about in the 19th century. The abolitionist movement is growing in the 1820s and 1830s and 40s and 50s, right up to the Civil War. This is a big issue. It is a social issue. It is a moral issue, and certainly for a lot of people, a political issue. This is something that people talked about, argued about, and were aware of. And just like you might be dedicated to a social cause in your life, maybe for you, the idea of fighting for racial justice is a critical part of your identity. Perhaps you are committed to environmental issues. Perhaps a cause near and dear to your heart is the abortion issue, whether you oppose it or support it. For some people, the idea of gender identity or gay rights is a big issue for them. So there may be issues that you today have very passionate feelings about and feel very strongly about. But what I'm trying to tell you is that in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, there were people of that generation who had their issues, and they felt just as strongly about the issues of their time as you might feel about the issues of your time. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Historians like myself always like to have these fantasies of, well, what would we be doing and what would we be like if we lived back then? I've always liked to sort of imagine myself, attending the Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls in 1848, or perhaps being active in the abolitionist movement. Historians like to imagine what they would be doing, and would they be, would they be the good guys, and what causes would they be fighting for if we were around back then? Of course, it's just daydreaming, really. But these issues were there. I have many students in this class right now, many women as well as men. To the ladies, if you were around back in the day, would you be active in the push for women's suffrage? Would you be eager to attend the Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York? Would you be abolitionists? What would your causes be? And so there are a lot of issues that are really working their way into everyday life that people are talking about. You also need to understand that one of the side effects and one of the unfortunate problems with the Industrial Revolution is that it creates problems that, in a way, that are different from the past. You now have to deal with matters of air pollution, water pollution, rapid growth of cities, sanitation issues, environmental issues, deforestation, working conditions. There are a lot of problems that come with the Industrial Revolution. You have to understand that it was new. So it isn't like there was a rule book in place. People are figuring this out. The country is figuring it out. Society is figuring it out as we go along. It isn't like nobody knew what to do or what it was going to be like. This is trial and error. This is a world where, there are no environmental laws. There's no income tax. There's no minimum wage. There's no Social Security. There's nothing. So, there are problems that are created in the society as a result of industrialization. We have factories being built, textiles, for example, and other manufactured goods. But what happens with that is you also end up in a situation where you begin to have a transition from skilled labor to unskilled labor. So, for example, if I'm a carpenter or a cabinet maker who makes furniture, I take wood and lumber and I use I practice my craft and I create beautiful furniture for people to purchase. But now if it's being made, on an industrial scale, my job might simply be just to, screw the knobs on the drawers, or, just cut the wood into different pieces, and I'm easily replaceable. If if I have somebody working in a textile mill and, their job is to just, run the machines, I don't have to pay them much. So, factory work, it provides jobs for people, but unskilled labor is always going to be paid less than skilled labor. If you go to a shoemaker and you want a custom pair of shoes made for you, they're going to cost you a lot of money. So we have, an increase in the demand for unskilled labor. They're not being paid much. Women are being paid less than men, children even less. And yes, child labor was a big deal back then. There were no laws against it. Never even, in the beginning, it didn't occur to anybody that, government should step in and, regulate this stuff. So it's sort of a free-for-all, really. Cities are going to grow because of industrialization and also because of immigration, which means you're going to see problems associated with that. You're going to see homelessness. You're going to see people living in poverty. You're going to see things that are going to be a byproduct of this industrialization in a way that, on a scale that simply hadn't been seen before. And there are people who are going to begin to question this. This is a world where, in the country, people are debating, should there be public education? Should there be rules or guidelines on how we care for or treat the mentally ill? Uh, there's a big debate in this country over the American justice system and law enforcement and incarceration. Do we put too many people in prison? Does it work? Are we doing the right thing? Could we be doing it in a different way? People were talking about this stuff in the 1820s and 30s, and they attempted reforms. Some of them worked better than others. There was an attempt to reform the American penitentiary system. It's during this time that American prisons decided, maybe solitary confinement is a good thing because you remove people from negative influences and they can be alone with their thoughts and perhaps engage in prayer or religious study and engage in some sort of spiritual rebirth. And of course, it didn't quite work out that way, but there was an attempt that people were talking about this, what should our prison system look like and how can we best design it? What do we do about people who are mentally ill? I mean, the treatment, there was no treatment. I mean, in those days, uh, people who were, hold on a minute, I want to turn off my email so I don't keep getting interruptions here. In those days, if a person had some sort of a mental or physical disability, they were the way they were treated. To say it's inhumane, I mean, you wouldn't want to treat an animal that way. And there were people who began to question that. There are people who began to say, maybe as a society, we have a responsibility to provide public education so that we can make sure that we have a population that is literate, that can read and that can write and that can do basic mathematics. So the society is going through a big change. Some of it, you may agree with, some of it you may not. I'll give you an example. This is the beginning of what's known as the temperance movement, which was a movement to restrict and eventually eliminate alcohol consumption. You also need to understand something that you may not know is back in that period, everybody drank. And people consumed back then a lot more alcohol than people consume today. And people generally consumed alcohol at every meal, even breakfast. Men drank, women drank, children drank. Now, that may seem strange to you, but one of the reasons why that happened is that, let's be honest, I mean, water, there really was no water purification at the time. People had a very limited understanding of infectious disease and illnesses that were spread through contaminated water. And what people did realize is that when you drank a beverage that has alcohol in it, you tend not to get sick the way you do if you drink regular water. So people drank all the time. Although a lot of the beverages they drank were of much lower alcohol content than today. I mean, you're talking about people drinking, beer that's 2 or 3% alcohol, for example. Homes in New England regularly had barrels of hard cider at the door, and you'd go to visit your friends, and the ladle would come out and go into the barrel, and here, have one. And a bell would ring during the day. Like you might have a job where you have to take a break you get 15-minute break. In those days, the church bells would ring and people would stop work and have a beer or have a glass of cider. Very common. A lot of alcohol was consumed, a lot. But as distilled spirits became more common, and by distilled spirits, I'm talking whiskey, what happens is people are engaging in the same drinking patterns and ritual drinking You drank to celebrate Christmas, you drank for christenings, you drank for political events. When something good happens, you drank. When something bad happens, you drank. And now, and people are starting to switch from cider and beer and ale, and now they're doing whiskey, which is a much higher alcohol content. And this became a problem. Just like we have a problem today with drug abuse, and there are a lot of people who have problems with addiction. Alcoholism, it's still a problem today. I mean, I'm not saying that it isn't, but at that time, there were real problems with people who were alcoholics. And it was a particularly bad problem for women. And the reason is, what could you do? Well, where could you go? If you were a woman and your father, uh, Saturday night is spending his pay at the saloon and gets drunk and then comes home and, beats the heck out of you and the family. I mean, there are not many options for you. This is a world where, law enforcement, insofar as there was any, the idea of responding to domestic violence problems it's not going to happen. I mean, if you're lucky, you might have friends or neighbors who would try to help, or perhaps a clergy member, or a reverend or a pastor or somebody might try to step in and see if they could help. But the idea of dad is drunk and he's on the rampage again, let's call 911. It's not happening. This is a world where men really could do whatever they wanted. The concept of marital rape does not exist. Men got away with just about whatever they wanted to get away with, and women were powerless. I mean, women at this time, they don't have the right to vote. I mean, in many cases, women didn't even inherit. Most cases, they didn't even inherit property. They didn't serve on juries. They were not equal citizens with men during this period. So, if you're a woman, for example, and you're married and you have a wonderful husband, except when he's drinking, and then he gets drunk and can't provide for his family, and can't function, or perhaps is violent, your options are virtually non-existent here. So these issues sort of go together. The idea of women's suffrage and women fighting for the right to vote. And then we have the temperance movement, which is a movement that basically says, the problem is alcohol. Let's remove alcohol from the equation. I don't agree with the temperance movement personally, but I'm very sympathetic to it. And the reason I don't agree with it is the idea that I'm a grown man, and if I choose to enjoy alcohol responsibly, I feel that I should have the right to do so. It would be like me saying to you, I eat too much In-N-Out and it's bad for me, so I'm going to make it illegal for everybody else because I eat too much and I'm overweight and it's bad for me to eat this food. So the solution is, let's just remove it from the society, and I can't have it anymore and you can't either. That's why I don't agree with the idea of making alcohol illegal, because just because some people can't drink responsibly doesn't mean that I shouldn't be allowed to have it either. But I'm very sympathetic to it, because I mean, imagine that you're a woman living in the 19th century, and I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, if I were a woman living in 1850, and the men in the family have an alcohol problem, and we can't pay our bills, and there's violence in the home, of course I'm going to support the temperance movement. Why wouldn't I? So it makes a lot of sense when you think of it. And that's the one thing I have always encouraged my students to do is, can you, even if you don't agree with something, can you put yourself in the mind of someone who feels differently and try to look at the issue from an alternative point of view? Can you do that? Can you say to yourself, even though I don't personally agree with this, there are other people who have a different view, and I'm able to comprehend and understand why they do. So it's not hard to understand. I mean, if you look at what life was like for women in the 19th century, of course a lot of them are gonna support the temperance movement and try to ban alcohol. Why wouldn't they? They're the ones who are paying the price, the biggest price for having men in their families who are alcoholics. So it's perfectly understandable. I mean, think about the people that you may know in your life who have a problem with drugs or alcohol. I mean, haven't you ever imagined? Don't you wish, if only they never had these drugs to take ever again, if only they never had the alcohol to drink? How nice that would be to see what their lives would be like if they didn't have drugs or alcohol. So it's not hard to understand why people supported the temperance movement. And if you take my History 109 class, you will learn that they succeeded. I mean, we banned alcohol in this country uh, between 1920 and 1933, but it didn't work. Making something illegal doesn't make it go away. That doesn't mean I'm in favor of legalizing everything. I mean, I do think there should be limits, but at the same time, just making something illegal doesn't always solve the problem the way you hope it will. And the temperance movement is a good example. So for the big issues of the 19th century, you have the slavery issue, women's suffrage, and temperance are the big social issues that are debated during that time. And there are other issues as well that I mentioned. People are starting to think about, maybe we need to consider developing a public education system. There is a reevaluation. There are people who feel that the way that the mentally ill and physically disabled are treated needs to be done in a much better way, in a more humane manner. There is talk about prison reform. So the people of that generation in that period were very active socially and politically. So for those of you who are interested in, sort of social and political activism, it isn't like, this generation invented the concept, is what I'm saying. There have been moments in the past that fit that definition. A lot of Americans were religious, and for them, being involved in a social cause was a way that they used to express their religious faith. So in the 1820s and 30s, if you identify as a religious Christian, you need a cause. Going to church on Sunday is not enough. So there were a lot of people who were very religious, who were very active in the abolitionist movement and the temperance movement as well, which was the movement to ban alcohol. So, I mean, if they didn't separate the idea of being a good Christian and spirituality with support. There were many people, especially in the North, who viewed slavery as a moral abomination and felt that, as a good Christian, they had a responsibility to try to end slavery. There were a lot of people who felt that, alcohol and whiskey, it's the devil's beverage, and it brings out it brings out sin in people. So let's try to get rid of alcohol. So that for a lot of people who supported these causes, their religious faith was often a motivating force why they did. Um, Now I want to switch gears a little bit and discuss intellectual life in America during this time. And I'm going to switch, and I'm going to become, at least temporarily, somewhat of a philosophy teacher. If you study the American Revolution, many of the ideas of the American Revolution are based on a period known as the Enlightenment, or Age of Reason. So, for example, people like Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and James Madison certainly would have been familiar with these great Enlightenment thinkers. People like John Locke or Voltaire or Rousseau, people like that, who are basically suggesting that society can function better when reason is applied to create an environment that is stable and mutually beneficial. But by the time we get to the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, there is a new philosophy that starts in Europe and finds its way to America and develops a very American flavor. Europe goes from this period of the Enlightenment and enters this period of thought that is known as European Romanticism. And while the Enlightenment is all about reason and logic, Romanticism is all about feeling and sensation and emotion and nature. And those ideas found their way to the United States and were embraced by many of the intellectuals of that period. And a lot of these people, both men and women, wrote some very thoughtful works of American literature. These writers and intellectuals have a name. They're known as the Transcendentalists. This is also known as the Transcendentalist movement. To transcend something is to try to rise above something, to look beyond the ordinary for a deeper meaning. And you may be familiar with some of these famous transcendentalist thinkers and authors and writers, people like Walt Whitman, Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Louisa May Alcott. I will share with you a personal story. When I was a college freshman, the college I went to required all freshmen to take a special class that was called the freshman seminar. And during the freshman seminar, they were going to basically make us read and write and write and read and basically just keep going. And they really wanted to push us intellectually to find out just, where were we at with our ability to understand concepts and to express complex ideas. And part of that program required me to read these transcendentalist authors. And what I will share with you is that the 18-year-old version of me hated every minute of it. And I remember sitting in the library trying to figure out just what exactly is Ralph Waldo Emerson trying to say. And I remember sitting in the library thinking to myself, why do they make us read this garbage? It was so beyond me that I had a sort of hostility to it. I thought this is a complete waste of time. I want nothing to do. I can't believe they're making me do this. Well, to make a long story short, I've totally changed my mind. And now that I'm older, here's what I've learned. What I've learned is that when a student is exposed to complex ideas and language and literature that is new to them, the student generally is not going to like it if they're not ready for it. At the age of 18, I wasn't ready for this stuff. First of all, 19th century literature is written in a style that I find somewhat annoying. They love these big flowing sentences with you can never have enough adjectives, it seems. Everything is described in this, the language is very, it's romantic. Everything is described. In other words, a thought that you could express with like 10 words, they're going to use 20. And the sentences just seem to go on and are overly descriptive with adjectives that I'm not overly familiar with, that I don't use in my daily life. 19th century American literature, it's great stuff, but it's not light reading. It's not easy reading. And at the age of 18, I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't there yet. It's like taking an athlete and promoting, it's like taking a Division III athlete and putting them on Division I. They're going to struggle because they're not there. They're not ready. I wasn't ready for this. But what I will tell you is that I revisited these authors in graduate school. And I thought to myself, when I took a class in graduate school, I said, oh my God, here we go again. They're going to make me read this stuff. I hated it. But in graduate school, I was at a different place as a student, and I was ready. And then what I realized was this stuff is great. and it speaks to me and it's timeless. For example, I don't know how many of you in high school ever took a class where you had to read Shakespeare. Shakespeare's great. Shakespeare's awesome if you understand what he's saying. So if I were going to teach Shakespeare, for example, before we even started, I would review some of the language of the period, and here's what they mean, and here are the words they use, and here's how they structure their sentences to prepare you uh, for that. 19th century American literature, if you've ever taken an early American lit class, it's great stuff, but it's tedious. Use the reactions button and raise your hand. Have any of you ever read Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Walt Whitman, Louisa May Alcott? I mean, have you ever read any of these people, or have any of you ever taken an early American literature class? It's great stuff, but it's a tough read, is what I can tell you. It's worth the payoff at the end if you stick it out, but you have to be ready. These writers and intellectuals set a mood and set a tone for American thought in the 1830s, 40s, going into the 1850s. And now that I'm able to understand it, I like it a lot. And I'd like to share some of these thoughts with you. One of the main concepts, and this is a direct reaction to the Industrial Revolution, one of the main concepts of the period is the idea that we've lost touch with nature. And that in order to be a complete person, and in order to reach our fullest potential, and in order to be content, one must be, or make an effort to be, in harmony with the natural world. Not only with the natural world around you, but with your own nature. You have to be true. You have to accept and embrace the beauty of the natural world, while at the same time, you need to be true to yourself. And I remember when I was in college, I read a passage by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I've never forgotten it. And I want to share it with you. Now, this is not a gender neutral style of writing, but I'm going to share this with you. Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. And that's a fragment from the passage. And I'm going to cut and paste this into the chat for you. And I remember when I was in my early 20s reading this, and this passage was written by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it really spoke to me. And what my interpretation of this, what he's saying is, you cannot be a fully functioning adult. You cannot be a fully functioning, independent being unless you're true to yourself. That if you are going to spend your life trying to live up to the expectation of others, if you are going to live your life trying to conform to what other people think you should be and what other people think you should do, then you're never going to make it. That nothing is sacred except the integrity of your own mind. Now think about that. That's a deep thought. It's a beautiful thought. It's a thought that expresses the importance of being true to your nature. I mean, what do you do if you're born into a family where everybody thinks you should be a certain way or live a certain way or do a certain thing, and that's just not right for you and you don't want to do it? Do you just suppress your own nature and your own will and desires and do what other people want you to do? Or do you basically say, I'm sorry you disapprove, but this is my life and I'm going to live it, the way I want to? So, everybody wants to sort of be thought of as being individuals, and we're going to do our own thing. But we conform to the expectations of other people a lot more, I think, than we realize. And so I really like that quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'm also a big fan, excuse me, a big fan of Henry David Thoreau. And he wanted to experience life in its most simplistic way. So he lived in a small cabin uh, in the woods. And here is what he wrote. And I really like it a lot. This is Henry David Thoreau. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. And this guy basically lives like a hermit, in in the woods near a pond, and just him and nature and his thoughts. He wants to really get back to basics. And I'll tell you, I think he's onto something. Um, I did a trip a while back where I took my family to Sequoia National Park, and it's within driving distance. It'll take you a few hours to get there, and it's where they have these beautiful giant redwood trees that are thousands of years old, some of the oldest living things on Earth. And I mean, you're talking about trees that are the width of a house, and you're up there in the mountains at a higher altitude, and the air is fresh and clean, and you see the green grass and the birds singing, and you look at these gorgeous trees. You can't help but feel good. Like if you're depressed, if you're unhappy, if you feel stressed out, if you feel burned out, if you're just angry, you go to a place like that and you have to feel better. There's just something about being surrounded by natural beauty that it's like plugging your soul in like a phone. I'm going to plug it in and get fully charged. You just feel better, which is why a lot of people, if they're having a bad day or they feel depressed or stressed, they might have a place that they like to go to where they can go for a walk, or walk along the beach or find a nice hiking trail. It's hard to be in a bad mood when you're walking around surrounded by natural beauty. So I think that Henry David Thoreau is onto something. So I like these ideas. I'll just tell you a story. We were at Sequoia National Park, and by the way, if you've never been there, put it on your list. It's probably, I'm going to make a statement. It's one of the most beautiful places probably on the planet, and it's within driving distance. It's magnificent. You will love it, and you will feel wonderful going there. There's Sequoia National Park, and then there's Kings Canyon National Park. They're both right next to each other. They're in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It's a magnificent place. And so there's this place in Sequoia National Park called Morro Rock, where you have to basically walk up this trail. It's like with these, there's like steps, but it's very steep, and you have to walk up to the top of this, basically this mountain. And there's this rock ledge that gives you a view of the entire area. It's just glorious, and it's just magnificent. So I was determined I was going to see it. So I'm walking up this mountain with my son, and as someone who was not exactly in the greatest physical condition, it turned out to be interesting to get there. And as I was approaching the top and finding it physically difficult to continue, I thought to myself, well, if this is where I'm going to die and have my heart attack, at least I'll be going out in one of the most beautiful places imaginable. And I did make it to the top, and it was worth it. And it was gorgeous. It was just glorious. So I like the idea. What these authors and writers, What they're saying is, as the world becomes more technologically advanced and as the world industrializes and modernizes, just don't forget to get outside. Get back to basics. And in a way, I think that what they're saying, I think their message is even more true than ever. With all the amount of time we're spending in front of computer screens, I mean, is it really good for us mentally, physically, and spiritually? So I'm a big fan. I like you to. I like Henry David Thoreau. I like Ralph Waldo Emerson, and the quotes of Henry David Thoreau and of these people are just they give you something to think about. Here, I'm going to give you another one here. Rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth. That's a good one. And there's so much. Here's another quote by Thoreau that really captures what this is all about. We need the tonic of wildness. At the same time that we are earnest to explore and learn all things, we require that all things be mysterious and unexplorable, that land and sea be indefinitely wild, unsurveyed, and unfathomed by us. Because unfathomable, we can never have enough of nature. And part of the transcendentalist philosophy, they believe in being connected to the natural world as much as possible, being true to your own nature, a big belief in the concept of individuality, and their belief in the concept of American democracy as it represents an opportunity for the individual to achieve their potential. So these authors, I mean, they're different, but they're similar. And I want to end by sharing with you a video clip about one of the transcendentalists. It's only a 4-minute clip, but I want to give you a sample of this, and then we'll call it a day. And then I'll talk more about the women's suffrage movement and Seneca Falls in my next lecture. But I want to share this with you, and I hope you find it interesting.
I had an early run before the dew was off the grass. The moss was like velvet, and I sang for joy. My heart was so bright and the world so beautiful. A very strange and solemn feeling came over me. It seemed as if I felt God as I never did before.
We had charming playmates in the little Emersons, Channings, Hawthornes, and Goodwins, with the illustrious parents and their friends to share our excursions and enjoy our pranks.
Ah, Lewis, why art thou here? Some danger must have brought thee. Tell me, dear brother.
Sister dearest, thou canst not help me. I came to say farewell, Teresa.
Farewell? Oh, brother, do not leave me. Thy love is all now left to cheer my lonely life. Wherefore must thou go?
I charged thy husband with neglect and cruelty, and I am banished. But I shall return and keep my vow to free thee from his power. Anna wants to be an actress. And so do I. We could make a lot of money, perhaps.
Louisa is so interesting and funny that other girls seem commonplace. I think she'll write something great one of these days.
For Louisa, life in Concord was an experience of incredible intellectual riches. It was a mecca for distinguished thinkers and writers.
You have Ralph Waldo Emerson across the street. You have Nathaniel Hawthorne down the road. You have Henry David Thoreau leading you through the woods.
I used to venture into Mr. Emerson's library and ask what I should read. I recall the sweet patience with which he led me around the book-lined room.
This is a very interesting book.
His kind hand opened to me the riches of Shakespeare, Dante, and Carlyle.
Wait a little for that. Meantime, try this. And if you like it, come again.
I left wildflowers on the doorsteps of my master, sung Minion Song in very bad German beneath his window, and wrote letters to him, but was wise enough not to send them.
Henry David Thoreau took her and her sisters walking in the countryside and taught them botany and biology.
Spent a pleasant afternoon asking questions and getting answers. Not dry facts, but the delicate traits and curious habits of the sweet things the speaker knew and loved.
Look at this, Louisa. In pines, a thin membrane.
Emerson was the family philosopher. Thoreau was the family hero.
With a handle for the wind to catch and transport.
It was Thoreau who had, after all, spent a night in jail in civil disobedience against the Mexican War.
More extensive and regular.
Later in her life, she puts Thoreau into her novel Moods as the man of action.
Adam Warwick was the manliest man she had ever seen, living out his aspirations and beliefs at any cost.
She also puts Emerson into her novel as the philosopher.
Geoffrey Moore had a most attractive face, with its broad brow, serene eyes, and cordial smile about the mouth.
The heroine is attracted to both of them and can't quite choose between them. But when she does choose, she chooses the man of action, and that's Thoreau.
So it's a period of ideas. She's a very fortunate woman to be given that opportunity, because most women during that period are not going to be given access to books and intellectual pursuits like she was. But women are going to want more. And so I've covered with you, sort of some of the changes. What I want to do in my next lecture is I want to talk about the growing abolitionist movement, which is going to become very active during this period. And of course, also the women's rights movement with Seneca Falls. So it's interesting stuff. I like the idea of giving you something to think about. I hope that you do. So I'm going to set it up so if anyone has any questions or comments, they may ask. And if not, you are free to go. And thank you for being here.